Everyone is a star child, made of stardust and the infinite potential of the universe. This extraordinary fearless something in each of us clamors for freedom from the bonds of fear, conformity, and an ordinary life. Welcome to Dr. Durr's Living in the Sweet Spot, where practical tools and solutions from the intersection of mind-body medicine, science, and spiritual well-being awaken and empower you to live out your infinite potential, to live life in the sweet spot. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Valen A. Durr, and welcome to Living in the Sweet Spot. Today, we are going to talk about warriors and specifically why some veterans, after they leave the service, fail to succeed in their civilian careers, why some of their skill set does not translate to their civilian life and their workplace, and then what are some of the things that we as individuals, as families, loved ones, and companies can do to aid them in their transition back to civilian life in order to be successful. So today I want to welcome my guest, William Toti. Hi there.
Hey, how are you, Dr. Durr?
I'm doing good. And you know what? I want you to know, thank you so much for being with me today to have this conversation because, I personally love warriors, and and actually, interesting enough, my first name in Hindi means mighty warrior. So I have a certain kinship with warriors and the bravery and the service. And so, retired Captain Toti, I want to thank you for your service and all that you do, and for again having this conversation with me, so that so that we can enlighten folks about the experiences, and again how we can be helpful and to bring some understanding to this topic.
Well, thank you. Thank you for talking about this very important subject. It's not widely discussed, I'm afraid. And so it's wonderful to get the opportunity to discuss it with you.
Right. Well, again, I'm in total agreement with you about that. And I think, obviously as a psychiatrist, I see a lot of PTSD, both more so in the civilian population. Certainly when I was in residency, my psychiatry residency training, I worked at the VA with veterans, so I got to see things more there in that light. But mostly at this point in my career, it's mostly civilians. But the point, of course, is that just how impactful and devastating PTSD can be, both to veterans and also to their families. So I don't know how well that is understood either. So let's just go ahead and jump in here and let's talk about this just a bit.
Absolutely. There is a category of retired former warriors and veterans who may suffer from PTSD from combat, so combat-related PTSD kind of things. And it's interesting though that it's not just the combat experience in Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that that might lead to combat-related PTSD. There's another category of people like me who were in the Pentagon on 9/11, and I would tell you that I suffered from it for years as well. I overcame it, I'm happy to report.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that one category of veteran. There's another category of veteran that's actually never been in combat, but for reasons of sexual assault or things like that,
Mm-hmm.
they end up suffering from PTSD.
So you know what? How about if we do this? Because also there a lot of folks may not even be aware of what PTSD looks like, right? What do you experience? So yeah, it's and I know you can get some variations, of course, but if you wouldn't mind sharing your experience.
Yeah, that's all I really can do. I can because I'm not a therapist or a psychologist like you, or psychiatrist like you.
Mhm.
So all I could do is tell you what my experience was, and what that was is basically a reliving, like like the experience that you suffered through gets put on automatic replay. You know, like on a video on your phone where you just basically dial in the loop button and it just
Correct.
goes play over and over and over again
Mhm.
in
Right.
your head. And initially, I would say there was a period of maybe 2 or 3 years where that happened every day, every
Wow.
day.
Wow.
And then over the course of maybe the next 5 years,
Hmm.
it began happening less and less frequent. And truth is, I did not seek help. That's my failure, right? I didn't.
Well,
I
I'm sure, but I'm sure there are reasons for it. So, but before we get into reasons why you didn't seek help, did you experience any other symptoms?
there were some, different. My kids would say, and the kids were still in the house in those days. They said, Dad is different.
Mm,
He he's not the same dad joking, fun loving kind of guy he
mm,
was before
mm.
that event
Right.
occurred. And I will tell you again that I disagreed with them. I took umbrage at the thought that I had changed.
Okay.
The truth is, I had, right? And so that's a factor as well. I eventually found therapy
Okay.
accidentally in a pastime, and I took up landscape photography, and
Okay.
I and into different places in the world, and I would stand in front of a mountain, and stare at the mountain, and it
Okay.
clears your mind. Try to capture that image of the light on the mountain,
Yeah.
and there's an artistic aspect to that. There's a technical aspect to that. For an engineer like me,
Yeah.
I like that as well, right? But you can't think about something else when you're doing that. Now, other people find other pastimes which help them get over it. But I do credit photography with being the solution for me. And over the course of, let's say,
So,
9/11 happened.
so hold on, because I don't want us to
Sure.
get too far. I don't want us to get too far away from this, which is, so what does PTSD look like? Okay.
Mhm.
Um, Specifically, when some of the signs or symptoms of PTSD, well, obviously the person has to experience or witness something that they feel is either life threatening or going to cause them serious harm or injury, or again witnessing something that's life threatening or called potentially, um, either actual life threatening, potentially life threatening, um, and witnessing that happening, or causing serious injury, and even witnessing that experience for someone else. Like, for instance, I've had people say, my friend was shot and killed in front of me.
Right.
So, that's an example. So, in addition to the actual experience, you've already, said sometimes that what happens is you get to re-experiencing the event over and over again, in your thoughts. People can have, then they can have problems, trusting. They can have what we call the physiological symptoms, or, things like your rapid heart rate, your sweating, things that feel like, a panic attack. There's also, um, they can have nightmares. That's part of re-experiencing it. Obviously, you re-experience it when you're awake. They can have obviously blame themselves for what happened, even if they weren't really to blame for what happened. They can have
Mhm.
difficulty trusting others. Then they can also have difficulty feeling joy. They'll feel like their life may be cut short. They can then also, some of the, and this is not a complete exhaustive list, but there's also things like, again, then having problems sleeping, being irritable and having irritable outbursts, changes in appetite or energy level. So, and obviously just being more avoidant and withdrawn, right? Not wanting to connect with people, because really what's happened is they've experienced something that they find so threatening that now they're put on high alert. And that's another thing, is the being hyper vigilant, and potentially looking for threat. So if I'm on high alert and looking for threat, then I'm going to do things that that I think are going to increase my safety. Right. And so sometimes that means avoidant and keeping people at a distance. One of the other things that can happen too, as a consequence of that, is that if somebody comes up from behind them and they don't see the person, then they get this exaggerated startle response, right? Some people run out of the room, some people will start swinging. So,
Yeah.
right. So those are, many of the signs or symptoms that people experience, when they've either experienced trauma or witnessed trauma. And so I take it you probably had some of those other ones when the kids said you weren't yourself. I'm assuming some of that was the irritability.
Yes, you're exactly right. And I can't tell you, Dr. Durr, in that short little snippet that you just did, you unpacked so much of what I went through. And just in that little bit, because you caused me to think just now, as you were
Mm-hmm.
talking,
Mm-hmm.
about aspects of what drove it for me that I had not thought about. So, for example, survivor's guilt. I lived, my
Mm-hmm.
friends died. So that was one event that occurred on
Yeah.
9/11. Second, I was involved in several rescues. One of the ladies we tried to rescue ended up dying.
Oh.
So I have guilt about that, about the fact that we tried to save her, but we couldn't. And then on 9/12, on September 12th, I was put in charge of the recovery effort. And so I
Mm.
had to go back in when all the bodies were still in there
Wow.
and survey the extent of the damage and help because this was still being treated like a crime scene. And so there were hundreds of bodies in there, and I had to kind of outline where the Navy, because I was Navy, where the Navy spaces were relative to other spaces, because they were trying to figure out the affected spaces.
Yeah.
So I saw a lot of things that nobody should ever see.
Yeah.
And
Horrible things, right?
correct. And I had triggers. I didn't have so many triggers from the survivor's guilt, although I had a little bit of that. I had a lot of triggers from the lady that we lost. Her name was Antoinette Sherman. I'll never forget that for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a whole bunch of visual triggers from the scene of all those bodies inside the Pentagon. And you said relive it, re-experience it, and be traumatized by re-experience. I was pretty good, though it burdened me. But there were a couple of movies actually where similar events to what I went through.
Mm-hmm.
In one movie I'll never forget, there's a scene where a bunch of soldiers are burned in Vietnam. A movie called We Were Soldiers Once and
Mm-hmm.
Young.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching the movie when those soldiers were burned, and it flashed back for me
Mm-hmm.
to the scene of burned people inside the building. I lost it. And so I didn't know you were going to do therapy on me today, but on a serious, you're exactly right on every one of those aspects that you talked about.
Right. And I
So,
think that I was going to also say too, because I don't think I really emphasized this part, but I think the other thing too, when you're talking about the re-experiencing it and the getting triggered. And so oftentimes people are not always aware of their triggers. And the thing too about it is you actually feel like you're there experiencing it all over again. Like sometimes you mentioned movies, like sometimes you'll see in the movies with the military, a guy that has been in Vietnam, and all of a sudden he hits the deck and he starts talking about, Charlie's coming, or the Viet Cong is coming, and this is so they're not even aware of their current surroundings. They're actually reliving it and re-experiencing it as though they're actually in that time and in that place of the trauma. So
Yeah.
and let me say this, please. It absolutely is not my intention to potentially trigger you. So if something comes up, please make me aware. And so here's the other thing too, and why I wanted to share these symptoms, because as we already talked about, there's a lot of things that people don't know. And so what in sharing what to look for, the signs and symptoms, what I've now also done is giving you the language to describe your experience, and to identify some things that you may not even realize were relevant, right? So that's the other part that's important. That's the other part that's important about this.
Yeah,
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure. The only thing I was going to say is I didn't talk about it until a documentary in 2016. The documentarians asked me to tell my story, and so I agreed to do it on camera. And again, they were very kind to me because they didn't air the parts where I lost it as I was telling the story.
Yeah.
And so I got the story out, and I've told the story several times since then, and I have been okay with it. So I don't think I'm going to lose it with you here today, Dr. Durr. But it did take from 2001 until 15th year anniversary, and I was still affected by it so much that I couldn't talk about it. But once I did, it got easier.
Yeah. And you also brought up an important point, was that in your case, you found an artistic, creative outlet that helped you work through your trauma. And, the other thing too that I've heard, warriors talk about is that part of their challenge in particular is not only witnessing the horrors, of war combat, but also some of the things they've done, which they can find very difficult to forgive themselves for. And so part of their healing process is working through that. And also I wanted to go ahead and kind of and share your background too, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So retired Captain William Toti, U.S. Navy. You're an author and of the book from CO, which is commanding officer, right? So from CO to CEO, a practical guide for transitioning from military to industry leadership. Great title. So you served more than 26 years on active duty, culminating as Commodore of Submarine Squadron 3, then 15 years as a corporate executive, culminating as a CEO. And then you've been featured in several documentaries, the most recent one being 9/11, One Day in America on National Geographic. The others are The Lost Ships of World War II on Fox, USS Indianapolis, The Final Chapters, PBS. Then there's also the 9/11 Pentagon one on the History Channel and some others. So, again, I want to, retired Captain William Toti, I want to thank you for your service and all that you've done, and frankly your courage, your bravery for being here and sharing your story with us, and and your band of brothers and women, brothers and sisters, I should say, your band of brothers and sisters, right? So we were talking about the fact that you found this therapy, which was the photography.
Hmm.
And so how so this thing so you obviously found something you feel that helped you make the transition, right? So
Absolutely.
we were talking about, so why is it, one that military people, when they leave, they can actually end up leaving service, but then also, when they leave, there's we talked about this briefly off camera, that there's also this high rate of suicide the first year, after they leave service.
Yeah, that's when military folks are the most vulnerable to suicide. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. The first one is, a lot of military folks, suffer injuries, whether they're psychological injuries or physical injuries that result in pain. So that becomes a risk factor, the fact that they're experiencing pain. The second one is that after they leave service, the support structures that they relied upon while in service are gone. And they have to rely on a different set of support structures, some of which aren't very effective. So, for example, the Veterans Administration gets, pilloried quite a bit, and you've worked there, so you understand why that might be. But the truth is, unless you are suicidal,
Hmm.
actually suicidal, and you report yourself as being suicidal, it's very difficult to get timely help from the VA. It's not uncommon that when you want to seek help and you aren't to the point of suicide,
Hmm.
where you call the hotline, it's 6 months or more before they can see you. So that leads to frustration, which becomes the second risk factor. And then the frustration leads to hopelessness
Hmm.
because they don't ever get better. And those three factors combine to lead to this, despair, which greatly increases the risk of suicide in the first year. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not you. I can't treat those factors. But what I learned over the course of my civilian career is that their transition into a civilian workforce can be one of those stressors that leads to the psychological pain, because it's very different working in the civilian world as it is in working in the world, in the uniformed world. And so over the course of my civilian career, I tried to mentor and counsel. I ended up hiring hundreds of veterans. And I wish I could tell you that the success rate in hiring those veterans was really good for me, because I was a veteran. But it wasn't any good for me as it was for anybody else, which is what led me to write the book. I decided to focus on the employment aspect of that transition challenge, because I couldn't treat the PTSD or the other factors, right? So that
Right.
was
So
my.
can I just also to have an idea? So what are some of the supports when they're on active duty that they have that are helpful, that they don't have once they leave service?
Well, because you are required to be deployable, that it's much easier to get military, psychological, dental care,
Okay.
because you need to be able to deploy at any time. So when you
Okay.
say, look, I got a problem, I got a bad knee, or
Hmm.
I'm struggling with this issue, this personal issue, you got chaplains available to you. You got mental health therapy available to you. You got physical physicians and, you know, um, healthcare available to you. Um, when you leave, you're no longer deployable. So the whole attitude changes, right? You've just got some people, unless you have an employment health care plan, some people just have the VA. And I have to tell you that when I've gotten VA care, it's generally been high quality care. The problem isn't the quality. The problem is for me, it hasn't been, and I can't speak for everybody. The problem is the access.
Right.
It's just way underfunded. And that becomes the problem. And that, again, not a problem I can fix. But if I can help people transition better into those civilian jobs and eliminate that stressor, that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay. Awesome. So uh, let's go ahead and take a break. And then when we come back, we'll talk about those things that you do in order to help that transition be successful.
Third annual Bronzeville Smooth Jazz Festival is located in Bronzeville, the Black Metropolis, 3701 to 3857 S. King Drive. August 3rd, Saturday, free admission and parking starts at 12 noon to 8:30 p.m. Featuring recording artists Chris Miskell Band, Carlos Cannon Band, Corey Wilkes Band, and Markiel Jordan Band. Vendors, Seniors Lounge, Kids Zone, sponsors by Mariano's, One Premium Vodka, Provident BK and Trust, CIBC and State Farm Insurances. Free admission and parking at the 3rd annual Bronzeville Smooth Jazz Festival. See you there.
Hi, if you just joined us, I'm your host, Dr. Balanae Durr, and I have the pleasure today of having a conversation with retired U.S. Navy Captain William Toti. And we are talking about the difficulties that military people can experience upon leaving the military and then becoming successful in civilian life. And so you were saying that while you've had the experience yourself of leaving the struggle, and you realize that, of course, there are services that are no longer available to the veterans now that they're civilians that they had before. And so while you couldn't help them with therapy, you could help provide some other ways for them to be successful in civilian life. And so what'd you come up with?
Well, in many ways, I was so blessed while I was on active duty. I had a great education. I had great leadership opportunities. I commanded a nuclear submarine. I commanded a squadron of nuclear submarines. And one would think,
wow. I just want to say, I have to say, wow.
One would think that would have set me up for great success in my civilian career, right? And yet I still almost failed. I screwed it up to begin with. And first of all, I didn't believe I could possibly screw it up, because obviously the civilian job is going to be easier than my 7 deployments were, right? I mean, wouldn't it make sense? And so, there's a bit of hubris involved there that causes you to think that any civilian job is going to be easier than any industry job, which turns out not necessarily to be true. Then there's the aspect that dealing with the civilian workforce is very different than dealing with a military workforce, right? I joke with my friends who are still on active duty. Leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you're leading people who can actually quit.
I'm going to have to remember that one. That's a great one. That's a great one.
Yeah, and you know what? Nobody told me that. I figured it out. When I was CEO of the submarine, my crew might disagree with me, but we're underwater. There's no place for them to go, right? There's nothing they're going to be able to do. When I'm heading a business unit, if my crew doesn't agree with me, they're out the door, right? They're leaving. And so that brings specific, different kind of leadership challenges that I never had on active duty. And so there's a whole bunch of other.
So I just thought about something, which was when you said the torpedo crew, they have no place to go. Well, they have one place to go, and that's through the torpedo chute. Through the torpedo chute.
Nobody ever offered to do that, right? And so I wonder why. But the thing when I had the epiphany, Dr. Durr, it was that the military actively makes the condition worse for people leaving service, because the people they're supposed to prepare you for civilian life, and the military wants veterans to feel really good about their active service, about their time on active duty. And so the way they do this is by lying to you. They tell you that I'm using the word lying.
Okay.
To be fair to them, the people who are running this training have never been in civilian private industry.
Mm.
They've never been a leader in industry. They're given a script and they're teaching from a script. But that script tells the veteran, the soon-to-be veteran, that, you gained all these wonderful skills on active duty. They're directly translatable to your future life in industry. And it turns out it's a lie. They are not. You're an infantryman. There's almost nothing you can draw from that that's going to help you in your civilian career, other than the ability to put up with hard times. In the military, we call it embracing the suck. This sucks, but I'm going to embrace it, right? Maybe that's a skill that you can use in civilian industry, because no matter how bad it gets at Home Depot, it's not going to be as bad as sleeping in the mud. Okay.
So here's the thing. I think we could, in the military, y'all call it embracing the suck. Civilian life is called resilience.
Yeah, resilience, right?
Resilience.
Yeah, in theory, we've learned some resilience, but the leadership skills, you've got to adapt the leadership skills. You think you're going to know more about business than you really do. You're going to have to lower the level of hubris, especially if you leave like I did as a senior military officer, where you think, I've got the world at my fingers, because I've succeeded in the most hostile, challenging environment on the planet. So this civilian thing is going to be easy in comparison. You've got to learn to put your rank away. None of your prior successes will have anything to do with your future success. There's a great book on that topic called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which I recommend. That book and my book are the two books I recommend to every transitioning military person. So people are going to be led to believe that because they were successful in the military, in fact, it's even worse than that. The more successful you are in the military, the more likely you are going to be to fail in industry. And as a result of that, almost 60% of transitioning veterans leave their first civilian job within 2 years. Normally because they're going to be let go. Sometimes it's because the civilian boss who never served in the military doesn't want to have that challenging conversation with them, where they tell them, you know what, your leadership skills aren't very good. You think they're better than they are. Or they just don't want them to, they don't have the other challenging conversation with them to tell them that they're failing. So they, encourage them or talk them into, maybe this job isn't the right job for you. Or maybe we're going to have to put you over in this other job because we made a mistake in bringing a veteran into this job. And so there's a whole bunch of aspects of this that I try to unpack with my book. I learned I can't mentor everybody, but I could write a book that hopefully will affect thousands of people that will have the effect of mentoring everybody. And that's what I'm hoping happens.
Okay, so what would you say then directly, what's specific other than embracing the suck? Other than that, what military skills are then transferable to the civilian life?
Well, I think the resilience issue that you want, other than that, leadership skills can be modified, can be adapted to be effective in the civilian world. I was first. So right now I'm having a moment of disillusionment because I'm thinking to myself, I'm going, wait a minute, hold on. I could have swore things like discipline, teamwork, failure is not an option. For just those three alone, to me, I would have thought would have translated from active duty to civilian life. They do, and I was going to get there. But
okay.
Thing because I talked so harshly about it just a moment ago, but you are correct. You survive as a team in the military. And that's going to be really important in industry as well. Understanding defense of the nation is sufficiently self-actualizing that you don't have to buy into the mission. You understand the mission. But once you understand the civilian mission of your job, that may be a little harder to embrace, but it's really important to embrace it. You will have that mission focus that will help you succeed. That's the failure is not an option aspect that you were talking about. So yeah, all of those things are very important on active duty and industry. And this is why I tell employers that veterans make really, really good employees, but don't just toss them into the deep end and expect they're going to know how to swim. They're going to need some help in adapting. Some of the
because I'm about to say, wait a minute, hold up. If that's not the case, then I'm going to have to go have a conversation with SecDef from the Transformers. Who said that about the unit?
And please do it, because he needs to hear it.
Okay.
Because he isn't doing veterans much good as they transition. And I've had those conversations with the people responsible for the transition training. They don't want to hear it, right? Because they're never measured on the effectiveness of their product. They're never evaluated on the effectiveness of their product. Nobody goes back and says, hey, those veterans you trained 5 years ago, how are they doing today?
Okay.
They have no way of measuring that, right? Okay. And tying it back to the people who conducted that training. So they basically do, it's catch and release, essentially, right? So that's what they're doing. Catch and release, catch and release. You know, good luck. Hope you do well.
So specifically, so you're talking about then it's you have to adapt your leadership style. Do you want to elaborate on that some more, or do you want to get into some of the other things that don't transfer, the other skills that don't transfer?
You know, the two big ones are the leadership style and the mission, right? So when I talk to people coming out of the military, I say, okay, you want to go work for fill in the blank, for, this new healthcare company. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who leave the military, had nothing to do with healthcare in the military, but go work for a hospital or something like that. And I say, so what's the, yeah. So in quality control, things like that.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand why the hospital wants to bring military people into medical quality control, but that's not my domain, so I'm not going to judge.
Okay.
But I'll say, okay, what's your mission really going to be in this new civilian job? And they say, making money. And I said, yeah, you know what? If you think that's your mission, you're going to fail. That has to be a byproduct of succeeding in the mission. But they've got this very naive, movie-based, they watched the movie Wall Street too many times. So they got this movie-based perception of what business is all about that turns out to be really, really wrong and counterproductive. And so until they get their mind right on the mission, that's going to be a big issue. And the teamwork aspect of it, they're going to have to work, they may have to work with the teams that they've never had to work with before. And, I'll be upfront with you and tell you that the first time I ever had to work with an openly gay person was when I was a civilian, because that whole aspect of it hadn't occurred yet. That revelation, epiphany, the change in policy hadn't occurred yet while I was still in uniform. When I was in the submarine force, we didn't have women on submarines yet. And so all of those, you're going to have to work with a much greater diversity, and I mean that in the greatest sense, diversity of thought. People in the military tend to be fairly conservative. And then you're going to have to work with, ultra left-wing people and not just work with them, but succeed with them. And so all of these aspects are a great culture shock. And these are for people who are well-adjusted mentally to the transition. People who are struggling mentally with a lack of support structure, these are way less important secondary factors.
Okay. So So how do you go about then adapting, basically, right?
Mhm.
Because that's to me one of the fundamental mindsets
Mhm.
that one has to have to thrive, to continue to exist in some instances, and certainly to even to thrive, is as a species, let alone as individuals, you have to be willing to adapt.
Mhm.
So how do you adapt those two challenges, right, that don't usually translate well? What's the way that either the person themselves obviously has to adapt, or that, the companies can help them adapt, families can help them adapt. And I realize to some degree there's obviously difference between the work and the home life, but there's some overlap. But so yeah. So how do we
So
help them adapt?
it's different for the different categories,
Hmm.
demographics of transitioning veteran. For the really junior guys and gals, they may not have developed the coping skills that more senior, let's say sergeant major or the colonel might have developed. So their adaptation may involve a lot of, um, you know, understanding and coping. There's another category, I would say the middle group, who've got a family, and and suddenly they're going to find themselves in a situation where they're going to be around that wife a whole lot more, or husband a whole lot more than they were on active duty. And
Hmm.
wait a minute, this is a different dynamic, right? And so, are they going to get tired of each other? That's a
Hmm.
real issue. I mean, I hate to say it, but
Or
when
also the increased contact then increases the opportunity for conflict.
friction, exactly,
Yes.
because we deployed for 6, 7, 8 months, and I came home. You treasure each other. Now there's some adjustment that goes on, right? Because now
Yes.
suddenly you're in the middle of everything, trying to get it to pretend like it was before you left, and they've been operating a certain way, and you've got to kind of adapt. But beyond that, you treasure each other a whole lot more than you did because of that absence. And you've been thinking about it and praying on it and hoping for it. And when it finally comes back, you treasure each other that much more. And so that absence is not going to be there anymore. And sometimes people don't react as well to that as they think they're going to. Then there's a third category of people, the senior folks. And what I tell them is your key to adapting is going to be to accept the reality that you're starting all over again, that you do not know what it's going to take to succeed in this new environment. That 24-year-old who's going to be in the desk next to you knows more about how to succeed than you do, General. So, General, you're a second lieutenant all over again. And you better understand that if you don't, you're going to fail. And so those are, not a single easy answer, I'm afraid.
So one of the things is, which is still translatable, everything is let go of the hubris, right?
Yes.
Let go of the arrogance that you think that
Yep.
you're smarter than everybody else in the room.
Yep. Because at one point you might actually have been, right? And that ain't going to be true anymore. So,
And if you weren't the smartest person in the room in that instance, when you're the general, you certainly got the most authority and power in the room.
correct. Yeah, you can
Yes.
hit the over button, and you're
Hmm.
not going to be able to do that in industry. There's a whole bunch of other little things, and I talk about in the book, like a company organization chart is not a chain of command, right? So don't think of it like a chain of command, because you will fail. You're going to be measured on success, not on following the chain of command. So, but again, too much to cover in this 1 hour, I'm afraid.
Gotcha. So then, so specifically, what are some things that then can be done in order to help them to understand the new mission?
Yeah, again, it has to be every company is providing a product or a service for a customer. You got to start there and think, how am I making that customer's life better? And just, you know what, making people's life better it can give you just as much self-actualization as defense of the nation. And so you've got to look for something that you can make peace with, join a company that you actually can embrace that mission. And that's really the first big step.
Okay. And then I think today's language, the big thing is, how to make this a great customer experience, right? How do we make this a great customer experience?
Absolutely.
Okay. So that becomes the new mission. And as you pointed out, which of course I don't think this is, I think, true in general, not specifically to transitioning from active duty, to civilian life, which is, I think by and large, we get the most satisfaction with the work that we do when it's coming from a place of how can I serve, as opposed to, how much money can I make? Because, if in my experience, if your focus is on how much money I can make, when you get to, as they say, you get to the top of that ladder and you found out you reached the wrong destination.
Exactly right.
Hmm.
Wonderful point. Because it's about service. You were in the service, in the military, and that doesn't have to change when you enter private industry. It's still about service. The nature of the service may change, but it's still about service. And if you're chasing the dollar, you ain't never going to catch it. Because no matter how much you make, there's going to be someone making more than you that you're going to be. So it needs to be about fulfillment. And I was lucky. It took me over a decade to figure that out, Dr. Dirk, but I did figure it out.
So you know what? You just said something else too, I think, that actually ties back into how we actually started off the conversation, which for me, what I also find, is one of the reasons people have difficulty when there's a change is if they're identified with whatever no longer is. So for instance, if you had, a certain rank, like you mentioned, sergeant major, for those who may not know, is the top enlisted person. And they obviously are, in control and running things, kind of like, the day-to-day operations and things like that. And so, or the general or the colonel. So if you lose that rank and something that's basically similar to it once you go back into civilian life, and even without that, then the question becomes, who am I? And without, if it's grounded in your previous rank and power and authority, and now you no longer have that, then that can really, that loss, the sense of self, the loss of that sense of self derived from that can really send a person into a tailspin.
Absolutely right. You believe that you are what the uniform represents, and you're not, right? You have to find your inner self. And, for me, it took probably more than a decade, but I did. And, that is part of the solution.
Yes. So the way that I describe that is agreed. And I said, you said you find your inner self. So for me, the inner self is, who was I before I came into this body, right?
Yes.
That's the inner self. That's my true identity. And then that doesn't change based upon, my career, my position, my authority, my power, my possessions. The position, power, authority, possessions then just becomes an expression of, self, but it's not self. Another way I say that to make it concrete for people is, when you drive in a car, are you the driver of the car or are you the car? Right. So, and a lot of folks get confused and they think that they're in terms of metaphorically think that they're the car. So they think that they're their position. They think that they're their rank. They think that they're their money. They think, and so, but if you remember who you really are, which is you're the driver, the true self is that eternal, infinite being that is occupying a certain body who is now in this job or in this role, in this position, in this. And so even when those things change or leave, you still have value because, as I like to say also, because you're the infinite potential of the universe appearing as you, right?
Yes.
So if we also can remember that, I think that can be really helpful. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree completely. I have my own spiritual, backing.
Yes.
And I don't even believe in my theology that I'm the driver of the car. I think somebody else is. And I'm just going along for the ride. But boy, what a ride it's been.
Well, you know what? And so let me say this. When I say the driver of the car, I don't mean the big driver. I don't mean the head driver. I'm meaning that, again, in my spiritual belief, who I am is an expression of the big driver, right? And so as an expression of that, I get to decide what do I want to do with that infinite potential that I am, right? What experiences do I want to create? And so in that aspect, that's the driver that's in this particular body, i.e. the car, that's deciding where we want to go. Because sometimes the big driver goes left and you go, no, I'm not going left. I'm going right. I'm going right. And then you go, oh, I messed up. I should have listened and gone left. That experience, I did not like that experience of going right. So yeah. So I didn't mean with a big driver. I mean,
I understand.
So anything else that you think that we can do in order to help the transition? So let me say this too. I just want to bring out because I want to make sure we get this in too, is for those folks who are struggling with mental health problems or difficulties. There's folks you can talk to. There's folks you can actually text. If you're having thoughts of suicide or feeling depressed or really anxious, you can call 988. That's the suicide prevention hotline number, which it's great that they've simplified it now. Again, the suicide prevention hotline number is 988 if you're struggling or having difficulties. And then anything else that you want to suggest, anything else that we didn't cover?
It's a full court press. It takes everyone to cause this issue of veteran transition to be improved. It takes mental health professionals like yourself. It takes people who have an understanding of the specific workplace challenges like me. It takes people that understand the specific family challenges. And there's so many aspects of this. There's no one solution that's going to solve all the problems. That's why we all have to keep working at it.
All right. And so, of course, you're absolutely right. And should people want to reach out to you, how they connect with you, social media, your website?
Yeah, WilliamToti.com. That's Toti spelled Toti. So 4 letters is pretty easy. My last name is a 4-letter word. There you go. So it's WilliamToti.com, and my email address is there.
Okay. So you know what? Now I just I hadn't even thought about that. Now I'm gonna have to borrow that because my last name is a 4-letter word too. And then are you on any social media?
I do Twitter, and it's at William Toti, or I guess we call it X today these days.
Yes.
And
so
LinkedIn.
Okay. So awesome. So I want to again encourage the audience to check out your book, From CO to CEO, a practical guide for a practical guide for transitioning from military to the industry leadership. And because this is really important that, as you know, there's that saying, I forgot who says it, but it's most important to seek to understand than to be understood. And if we want to honor and help those men and women who have sacrificed and their families have sacrificed so much to be of service to us as a nation, then it is important that we do what we can to aid them from transitioning from that active role of warrior, and support services to back to themselves and to have a successful life. So I want to thank you so much, Bill, for writing the book, and again for your service, for being here on the show with me today, and sharing such valuable information. It's been wonderful, and I'd love to have you back sometime.
Well, thank you, Dr. Durr. Thank you for what you do, and it was a great pleasure talking to you today.
And you're welcome, and thank you so much. I'm Dr. Durr, awakening and empowering you to live out your infinite potential, to live life in the sweet spot. I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us today in the sweet spot. Share, follow, and like us on social media. To learn more, please visit balinadurmd.com, spelled BALINADURRMD.com. Join us next week, and remember, when you heal your mind, all things are possible.